Carter estate stood like a monument to power and emptiness, marble floors echoing every step, crystal chandeliers scattering cold light instead of warmth, and portraits of long-dead ancestors watching from the walls like silent judges. It wasn't a home. It was an empire built on contracts and control. On that humid June evening, under a sky swollen with storm clouds, that house would witness a union neither heart nor fate had chosen. Malik Carter, 32, moved like a man carved from discipline. His sharp jaw, dark bronze skin, and piercing amber eyes were the kind of features people admired from afar, but feared up close. As heir to the Carter Corporation, he had inherited not only wealth, but also his father's creed. Love is a liability. Marriage is a merger. Choose with your mind, never your heart. That was how he ended up at the altar beside a woman whose name he barely knew. Amara Johnson, 24, was the daughter of Darius Johnson, a once respected businessman whose company had collapsed under failed investments. The deal was simple and cruel. Malik would marry Amara, saving the Johnsons from ruin, and in return, her father would hand over what little remained of his business, strengthening the Carter empire. Inside the chapel, Malik didn't look at her once. His gaze stayed fixed on the horizon beyond the stained glass windows. The ceremony was just another corporate agreement sealed with vows instead of ink. But when the pastor said, "You may kiss the bride," he finally turned, and something inside him buried under years of ice stirred. Amara stood trembling under the lace veil, her brown skin glowing faintly beneath the chandelier's light, her wide eyes shining with tears. She was beautiful, but not in the practiced way society women were. She looked fragile, heartbreakingly real. Malik felt a flicker of heat inside his chest and crushed it instantly. He leaned forward, brushed her lips quickly and formally, then turned away. The taste of her tears lingered, burning more than the whiskey he'd drink later. The reception that followed was a masquerade of fake laughter and empty toasts. Malik drowned the evening in scotch glass after glass, numbing his thoughts. Across the hall, Amara sat alone at the long table, her hands folded in her lap, untouched food before her. No one spoke to her. No one welcomed her. She was a transaction, purchased, delivered, and forgotten. By midnight, the guests were gone and silence filled the mansion. The scent of white roses forced into every corner only made the air heavier. Malik climbed the marble staircase, his footsteps steady but his pulse uneven. Beneath the surface of control, something restless stirred. Resentment, guilt, and a darker hunger he refused to name. When he reached the master bedroom door, he stopped. He could feel her presence beyond that wall. The wife he'd bought, the woman waiting in fear. His hand hovered over the bronze handle. Outside, the storm broke. Thunder cracked, wind howled through the trees. Inside, nothing but stillness. He remembered his father's voice. Close the deal. Never hesitate. But another voice, quieter and deeper, whispered from somewhere he hadn't listened to in years. Don't destroy what isn't yours to break. Malik stayed frozen there, caught between the two men inside him, the ruthless Carter heir and the man who, for a fleeting second at the altar, had felt something human. Finally, he dropped his hand from the door. Thunder rolled again through the halls like a warning. He turned and walked away, the scent of roses following him like a lie. Behind that door, Amara sat on the edge of the bed, her wedding gown spread around her like a cloud of broken dreams, waiting for a man who would not come. And somewhere down the hall, Malik Carter closed his eyes against the storm and wondered, for the first time in his life, what had he done? The storm outside raged through the night, rain hammering against the tall windows of the Carter estate. Lightning flashed across the velvet sky, illuminating the empty hallways in sharp, silvery bursts. Malik walked aimlessly, his loosened tie hanging from his neck, his mind a blur of whiskey and unspoken thoughts. The house, usually his fortress, now felt like a cage echoing every step he took. He stopped outside the master bedroom again. The door stood silent, almost daring him. Behind it, Amara waited, the woman whose life had been traded like a contract. He knew it, she knew it. Everyone did. He turned the handle and pushed the door open. The faint scent of roses filled the air, mixed with candle smoke. The soft light danced across the room, glinting off the silk of her gown. Amara stood near the window, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold her body together. Her reflection trembled in the glass as thunder rolled. When she turned, he saw it, the raw fear in her eyes. She looked at him not as a husband, not even as a man but as a stranger capable of breaking her. Malik's jaw clenched. The alcohol in his veins urged him forward, to say something cruel, to reclaim the control slipping from his hands. "The little princess finally arrived at her castle," he said, his voice low and sharp. The words tasted bitter even as they left his mouth. He took a slow step forward, then another, until the distance between them disappeared into tension. "Are you ready for what you were bought for?" His tone dripped with cold mockery, but beneath it was confusion, a chaos he couldn't name. Amara pressed back against the wall, her trembling hands clutching the lace of her dress. She tried to speak, but no sound came. The flickering candlelight caught her tears as they slid down her cheeks. Malik stopped inches from her, the scent of whiskey and expensive cologne surrounding them. His hand rose almost on its own, fingers catching her chin, tilting her face up to meet his. Her breath came fast, uneven, her pulse fluttering beneath his thumb. "Tell me," he murmured, his voice gravel and smoke. "How many times did you rehearse this?" The frightened virgin act. The innocent bride. "It's convincing, I'll give you that." "I'm not acting," she whispered. Her voice broke like glass. For a second he said nothing. Then he laughed, dry, humorless, empty. His eyes traced her face, every tear, every trembling line, as if trying to prove to himself that she was lying. But what he saw wasn't performance. It was truth. And it hit him like a blow. The anger in his chest twisted into something else, something heavier. His hand slid from her chin to her throat, feeling her racing heartbeat. "Then tell me, Amara, what do you feel right now? Fear? Disgust? Or maybe curiosity?" She flinched under his touch, tears spilling freely now. "Please," she whispered, barely audible. "Don't do this." The words stopped him cold. For a heartbeat, the storm outside disappeared. He saw not the woman who came with a contract, but the terrified girl who had no choice. The whiskey haze in his head began to fade, replaced by something far more painful: clarity. Malik stepped back. The air between them grew heavy, thick with what almost happened. He turned away, running a hand through his hair, his breathing uneven. "You're lucky," he said finally, his voice flat, tired, hollow. "I don't force women, no matter how much I paid for them." He walked to the door, his hand resting on the handle. "Go to sleep. Tomorrow you'll have duties as a wife. But tonight—" He hesitated, jaw tight, eyes fixed on nothing. "Tonight I don't have the stomach for pretending." The door clicked shut behind him. Silence rushed in. Amara slid down the wall, her knees pulled to her chest, her wedding dress pooling around her like a storm cloud. Her tears fell quietly, the sound drowned by the thunder outside. Down the hallway, Malik leaned against the wall, eyes closed, fists clenched. The image of her fear, so pure, so human, burned behind his eyelids. For the first time, the heir who ruled everything felt utterly powerless. He had built an empire on dominance, but one trembling woman had brought it to its knees. And as the night deepened, Malik Carter realized that something inside him had begun to crack. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving behind a heavy stillness that settled over the Carter estate. The sun crawled through the tall windows, spilling light across marble floors, yet the house felt colder than ever. Malik woke up in the library, his head resting against the arm of a leather chair, a half-empty bottle of whiskey glinting beside him. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie undone, his mind raw from too much thinking. He'd slept, but not really. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. Amara's trembling lips, her terrified gaze, the quiet plea in her voice. "Please don't do this." It echoed like a curse he couldn't shake. He stood, running a hand over his face, and walked toward the bathroom. The cold water stung his skin, but it didn't cleanse the guilt spreading through his chest. For years, he'd prided himself on control, on never being ruled by emotions, but now he felt them clawing from the inside. He had crossed no line, but he'd come close enough to hate himself for it. When he finally stepped into the dining room, the silence was suffocating. The long table gleamed beneath a chandelier that cast more shadow than light. He expected her to stay locked in the bedroom, refusing to see him, but she was there. Amara sat at the far end of the table, wearing a pale blue cotton dress that made her look even younger. Her eyes were swollen, her expression distant. She didn't look up. She didn't move. She just sat there, her hands folded tightly in her lap as if bracing herself for another battle. Malik hesitated in the doorway longer than he should have. He was used to commanding rooms, but this one felt like walking into a courtroom where he was the accused. He crossed to his usual seat and pulled out a chair. The scrape of wood against marble sounded louder than thunder. Neither spoke. The only sound was the soft clink of cutlery as Miss Rosa, the housekeeper, entered carrying a tray. She was an older woman with kind, tired eyes who had worked for the Carters since before Malik could walk. She set down the coffee pot, her movements careful but firm. When her gaze met Malik's, there was something in it, disapproval mixed with quiet disappointment. She said nothing, but her look said everything. "You crossed a line, boy." Malik ignored it. He picked up the cup, took a sip, and set it down. His throat felt dry, not from the coffee, but from the words he couldn't find. Finally, his voice broke the silence. "How do you take your coffee?" The question hung in the air like something fragile and misplaced. Amara's head lifted slightly, confusion flickering across her face. Her lips parted, but she hesitated, as if expecting cruelty hidden behind the question. "With a little milk," she said softly, her voice rough from crying. "And 1 spoon of sugar." Malik nodded, his tone quiet but steady. "You heard her, Miss Rosa. Prepare it that way." The woman blinked, surprised, then nodded and left the room. When she returned a minute later, she placed the new cup in front of Amara and left without a word. Amara stared at the cup for a long time before picking it up. Her hands shook faintly. She took a slow sip, and for the first time since the ceremony, a hint of color touched her face. "Thank you," she murmured, unsure whether the words were for him or the woman who served it. Malik didn't respond. He just watched her, the way she held the cup as if it were something sacred, the way her eyelids fluttered when the warmth touched her lips, the way she exhaled slowly after the first sip. Something twisted inside him, an unfamiliar ache that wasn't lust or pity, but something deeper. He'd spent his life mastering silence, but this one felt unbearable. "You should eat," he said, his voice quieter than before. She looked at him briefly, then back down at her plate. "I'm not hungry." Malik wanted to say something more, but the words refused to come. He simply nodded and pushed his chair back. "Do whatever you need today," he said, pausing before leaving the room. "You're not a prisoner here." He didn't wait for her reply. As he walked away, Amara looked up for the first time, her eyes following him until he disappeared beyond the door. For a long while she sat there alone, listening to the distant sound of his footsteps fading through the corridor. She didn't understand him. This man who had nearly destroyed her last night but now spoke with the voice of someone uncertain, almost gentle. She didn't know whether to hate him or pity him. Upstairs, Malik stood by the window of his study, staring at the garden below. The rain had stopped, but the grass still shimmered with dew. He didn't know why he'd asked about her coffee, or why her trembling hands haunted him so deeply. He only knew that for the first time in his life, guilt wasn't something he could outdrink, outthink, or ignore. It sat in his chest, heavy and alive. Somewhere deep inside, the first crack had appeared in the walls he'd spent a lifetime building. And though he didn't realize it yet, through that crack, light had begun to seep in. Rain returned 5 nights later, washing the city in silver streaks and whispering against the windows of the Carter estate. Malik was still in his office long past midnight, buried in contracts and financial reports that refused to quiet his mind. He read the same paragraph 5 times without processing a single word. No matter how hard he tried to focus on numbers, her voice kept echoing in his head, soft, trembling, pleading. "Please don't do this." He had repeated those words so many times in his memory that they no longer sounded like hers. They'd become his own confession.
I feel like I deserve to.
The lightning outside flashed, followed by the deep growl of thunder.
You didn't hurt me.
Malik pushed back from his desk and rubbed his eyes.
That matters.
That's when he heard its soft footsteps in the hallway. Too light to be Miss Rosa's. He looked up just as Amara appeared at the edge of the open doorway wearing a white robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. In her hand was a glass of water. For a moment, she didn't see him. She was simply passing by, quiet and careful, as if afraid of waking the house. "Amara," he said before he could stop himself. His voice came out lower and rougher than he intended. She froze. Slowly, she turned to him. Her eyes looked startled, like a deer caught in unexpected light. "Yes?" she whispered. Malik stood, his heart beating faster for reasons he didn't understand. He stepped closer, the sound of the rain filling the silence between them. "Are you okay?" The question sounded absurd even to him. Of course she wasn't. She blinked, uncertain. "I'm fine." "Liar," he said quietly. His tone wasn't cruel, it was simply true. Her lips trembled, and for a second she seemed ready to turn away. But she didn't. "What do you want me to say?" she asked. "That I hate being here? That I feel trapped in this house? That every time I hear your footsteps I stop breathing?" Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to keep speaking. "You bought me, Malik. You made sure I had nowhere else to go." Her words struck harder than any boardroom betrayal ever could. Malik took another step closer, rain light flickering over his face. "You think I wanted this?" he asked, his voice low. "You think I wanted to marry a stranger just to satisfy my father's greed?" Amara's chin lifted slightly, her fear mixing with anger. "You could have refused," she said. "You could have said no. But you didn't. You accepted. You signed my life away like another deal." Her eyes shimmered with tears that refused to fall. "And now I live in this house where no one speaks to me, where every wall reminds me I don't belong." Malik's throat tightened. For the first time, he had no defense, no words to justify himself. "You're right," he said finally, the truth tasting like glass in his mouth. "I accepted, and I was an idiot that night." He paused, struggling with something he wasn't used to. Humility. "I treated you like you weren't human, and that was unforgivable." Amara's eyes widened. That was the last thing she expected to hear. She hesitated. "I didn't think you knew how to say words like that." Malik let out a faint, humorless laugh. "Neither did I." The storm outside roared again. He took a slow step toward her. "That night," he said, his voice softer now, "you told me you weren't acting. I didn't believe you. I thought it was all part of the show. But now," his eyes met hers, "now I'm starting to believe I was the one pretending." Amara shook her head, tears spilling at last. "You said I was pretending to be innocent." Her voice trembled but didn't break. "But I wasn't. I've never been with anyone, Malik, never." The words stopped him. The air seemed to leave the room. He stared at her, searching her face for even the smallest sign of deception. But there was none. There was only truth, naked, painful, and pure. "What?" he whispered. "I'm a virgin," she said again, firmer this time. "I saved myself for someone who loved me, who wanted me for me. And instead I ended up here, married to a man who looked at me like a price tag." Malik's pulse thundered in his ears. Every cruel word, every cold look, every assumption he'd made about her came crashing back, sharper than the rain slamming the windows. "God," he breathed. "I didn't know. Would it have mattered?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Would you have treated me differently?" He stepped closer until he was just inches from her. "Yes," he said. "I would have." His voice was heavy, strained, filled with regret he couldn't mask. "If I'd known what you were giving up, what I was about to destroy, I would have walked away before I touched that door." Silence filled the space between them, louder than the storm outside. Amara's tears kept falling, but her breathing steadied. She looked up at him, searching for lies, and found none. "You're sorry," she said quietly. "I am," Malik answered. "But sorry doesn't undo anything." "No," she whispered. "It doesn't." He took another step back, giving her space, his hands shaking slightly. "Go to bed," he said softly. "You don't have to lock the door tonight. I won't come in. I just wanted you to know I see you now." Amara stared at him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "I believe you," she said. Malik exhaled, the tension in his chest loosening for the first time in days. She turned and walked away, her steps light but deliberate, disappearing down the hallway. He stood there long after she was gone, staring at the place where she'd been, feeling the storm fade around him. For years he had lived behind walls of pride and precision, untouchable and unmoved. But one woman's truth had torn through all of it, leaving nothing but a man standing in the ruins of his certainty. And somewhere deep inside, for the first time in his life, Malik Carter wanted to change. The days that followed Amara's confession felt different, quieter, softer, yet charged with something Malik couldn't name. The Carter estate, once frozen in formality, now seemed alive in strange, subtle ways. It wasn't peace. It was tension disguised as calm. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of things they didn't know how to say. Malik hadn't gone back to the master bedroom since that night. He slept in the library, on the couch, or sometimes in a guest room, his mind restless and unwilling to settle. He told himself it was out of respect that he was giving her space, but the truth was more complicated. He was afraid of the way she'd begun to invade his thoughts, of the way her voice lingered even when she wasn't speaking. Every morning, he saw her somewhere in the house. Sometimes in the hallway with her head lowered, sometimes in the garden walking slowly between the roses, sometimes just standing by the window looking out at the endless stretch of sky. And each time he saw her, something inside him shifted almost painfully. He didn't speak. He just watched. And in those wordless moments, the cracks inside him widened a little more. For Amara, the days moved like slow-moving clouds, still uncertain, but no longer suffocating. Malik no longer felt like a threat, though he still intimidated her in ways she couldn't explain. He was quieter now, restrained, almost distant, but there was a heaviness in his silence that felt new. She'd catch him looking at her sometimes, not with ownership, not with anger, but with a kind of curiosity that made her heart beat faster. It was like he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't realize was himself. It was a Thursday morning when something changed completely. The sunlight poured through the dining room windows, scattering gold across the table where Amara sat reading a magazine she'd found in the library. Her hair was loose, tumbling over her shoulders, and she wore a soft ivory dress that looked simple but elegant. When Malik entered the room, she looked up, expecting the usual silent routine, the distant greeting, the quick breakfast, the polite escape. But this time he didn't walk past her. "Good morning," he said. Amara blinked, momentarily thrown off. "Good morning," she replied, her voice cautious. Malik didn't sit at the far end of the table like he always did. Instead, he pulled the chair beside her and sat down. The sudden closeness made her pulse stutter. She could smell his cologne, wood, spice, and something darker, and it made the air feel heavier. Miss Rosa came in with the coffee tray, but before she could ask how Amara wanted it, Malik spoke first. "With a little milk and 1 spoon of sugar," he said. Amara's head turned sharply toward him. He remembered. The detail was small, almost insignificant, but it hit her like a wave. No one ever remembered things about her, not even her own father. She didn't know what to say, so she looked back down at her cup, hiding the faint tremor of her lips. "Thank you," she whispered. Malik just nodded, taking his own black coffee. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the antique clock and the distant chirping of birds outside. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke again. "Did you sleep well?" Amara looked at him, startled. The question was simple, but the tone, quiet, almost hesitant, felt genuine. "Sometimes the house feels too quiet at night," she said softly. "It's so big. Sometimes I wake up and forget where I am." Malik was silent for a moment, processing her words. "Would it help if I asked Rosa to leave the hallway lights on?" he asked. She stared at him, caught between surprise and disbelief. "You'd do that?" He looked down at his cup, his expression unreadable. "Already did." And just like that, he stood and left the room, leaving Amara sitting there with her heart pounding and her thoughts spinning. The man who once made her afraid to breathe had just remembered how she liked her coffee and left lights for her in the dark. That afternoon, Malik worked in his office but got very little done. Every time he tried to focus, his mind wandered back to the dining room, to her voice, her soft surprise, the faint blush that had colored her cheeks. It unsettled him in a way that meetings and markets never could. He didn't understand it, and that frustrated him more than anything. He wasn't supposed to care, but he did. That night, as he walked past her door, he noticed something different. The door that had always been locked was now slightly open. Not enough to invite him, but enough to say she no longer feared him. He paused, his heart pounding harder than it should have. For a moment, he considered walking in, but he didn't. He stood there in the dim hallway, staring at the sliver of light spilling through the crack, and then kept walking. But when he laid down on the couch in the library, he couldn't sleep. His thoughts were tangled with the image of that open door and the woman behind it. Amara, the wife he never chose. The woman who was slowly, without meaning to, teaching him how to feel again. And though neither of them would say it out loud, something fundamental had shifted in the air between them. The cold walls of the Carter estate were still standing, but for the first time, there was warmth inside. The invitation arrived in a cream-colored envelope trimmed with gold, an elegant emblem pressed in wax across the seal. Malik found it on his desk one morning, sent by one of New York's elite foundations. A charity gala, the kind of event he usually despised. All champagne smiles and silent judgment, a room full of people pretending to care while measuring each other's worth in dollars and names. He should have ignored it. He'd ignored dozens before, but this time something inside him wanted to go. Worse, he wanted Amara to go with him. He told himself it was about appearances, about image. He was a married man now, and a man in his position couldn't keep showing up alone. That was the logical explanation, the one that made sense on paper. But deep down, buried beneath the layers of reason, there was another truth. He wanted to see her somewhere other than this cold house. He wanted to watch her step into a world that had only ever treated her as a transaction, and make it bow to her without even trying. When he mentioned it over breakfast, Amara almost dropped her cup. "A gala?" she repeated. "You want me to go with you?" Malik's tone stayed calm, detached. "You're my wife. It would be strange if I showed up without you." She hesitated, fiddling with the hem of her dress. "I don't have anything to wear, nothing that fits that kind of event." "Rosa has connections at a few boutiques," he said, already standing. "She'll arrange whatever you need. Choose what you like." And before she could respond, he was gone. The days leading up to the event were a blur of quiet anticipation. For Amara, it felt like stepping into a life she was never meant to live. Rosa fussed over her with gentle pride, helping her pick a gown, a deep navy blue silk that moved like water when she walked. Her hair was styled in soft waves that framed her face, her makeup subtle but enough to make her eyes glow. When she looked in the mirror that evening, even she barely recognized herself. Downstairs, Malik adjusted the cuffs of his black tuxedo, the perfect image of control and quiet dominance. But when he looked up and saw her descending the staircase, the world seemed to stop moving. For a moment, the empire, the expectations, the walls, all of it vanished. Amara stood at the top of the stairs, the soft light glinting off her skin. The dress hugged her just right, neither revealing nor shy. She looked both delicate and untouchable. His breath caught, and he didn't even realize his fingers had frozen mid-adjustment. "Am I presentable?" she asked, her voice uncertain but warm. Malik's gaze traveled slowly from her face to her feet, taking her in completely. When he spoke, his voice was lower than usual, rough around the edges. "You're perfect." She flushed and looked down, unable to meet his eyes. He stepped forward, extending his arm. "Shall we?" She hesitated for half a heartbeat before sliding her hand into his. The warmth of his skin against hers sent a spark through both of them. They didn't speak as they left the house, but something in that silence felt alive. The ballroom at the plaza was already glowing when they arrived. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across a sea of polished marble and tailored luxury. Strings of soft music floated through the air, and the scent of champagne and lilies lingered like perfume. As soon as Malik and Amara entered, heads turned. The whispers started immediately. Soft, sharp, inevitable. Everyone in that room knew who Malik Carter was. And everyone knew the rumors about his marriage, the forced deal, the desperate bride, the cold heir who'd bartered love for power. Amara could feel their eyes on her, like invisible needles against her skin. She tried to stand tall, but the judgment pressed down on her shoulders like weight. Malik felt it too. He leaned closer, his breath brushing her ear. "Ignore them," he murmured. "You owe no one here a damn thing." Her pulse jumped at how close he was. She nodded slightly, drawing in a shaky breath. "I'll try." They moved through the room, his hand guiding hers with quiet confidence. Malik exchanged polite words with other executives, but his eyes found Amara between every sentence, watching her reactions, the subtle curve of her mouth when she forced a smile, the way her hand occasionally brushed her stomach like she was grounding herself. Then came her. A tall woman in a blood-red dress appeared from the crowd, moving with the practiced grace of someone who knew her beauty was a weapon. Platinum hair, crimson lips, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Malik," she purred, her voice smooth and poisonous. What a surprise, Malik's jaw tightened. "Denise." The name alone told Amara everything. The familiarity in the woman's tone, the way Malik's posture changed. This was someone from his past. Someone who once held space where Amara now stood. "So the rumors were true," Denise said, her gaze cutting to Amara like a blade. "You really got married." She looked Amara over from head to toe, her smile curling cruelly. And to her, Amara's breath caught. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the marble beneath her feet. "Yes," Malik said sharply, to her. "My wife." Denise laughed, the sound brittle and bright. "Oh, Malik, please. You don't have to pretend." Everyone knows it was a business deal. The poor thing probably thought she'd won the lottery. Tell me, darling, she said, turning her full venom on Amara. Did you use your innocence as a bargaining chip? That's almost clever, really. The world tilted. The music blurred. Amara's vision swam, her fingers trembling at her sides. How did she know? Before the shame could crush her, Malik moved. His arm wrapped firmly around Amara's waist, pulling her against him. The motion was quick, protective, final. Watch your words, Denise, he said, his voice low and dangerous. My wife has more grace in one breath than you've managed in your entire life. And unlike you, she doesn't need to sell herself to stay relevant. Color drained from Denise's face. Her painted lips parted, but no words came. Malik's stare didn't waver. It burned cold, sharp, merciless. Speak to her again, he added softly, and you'll find every door in this city closed to you. Understand? Denise stepped back, humiliated, before spinning away in a flash of red silk. The crowd pretended not to stare, but everyone had heard. Amara stood frozen, still pressed against Malik's chest, her body trembling. She tried to pull back, embarrassed, but his arm stayed firm around her waist. Breathe, he whispered near her ear. She's nothing. You hear me? Nothing. Her heart beat fast against his chest. For the first time, his presence didn't feel like a threat. It felt like safety. She closed her eyes for a moment, drawing strength from it. When she opened them, he was already looking down at her, his expression unreadable but softer than she'd ever seen. Dance with me, he said suddenly. It wasn't a request. He led her to the center of the ballroom where couples were already swaying to the orchestra's slow rhythm. His hand found hers. His other settled at her waist. They began to move slowly, their bodies adjusting to each other's rhythm. At first she was stiff, her heart pounding too fast. But Malik pulled her closer, closing the space between them until her cheek brushed his chest. You dance well, she murmured, more to fill the silence than to praise. Mandatory lessons as a kid, he said. My mother insisted a Carter should know how to move in public. And do you always do what you're told? She asked softly. He smiled faintly, turning her in a slow spin before drawing her back. Never, except when I want to. Their eyes met. The air around them thickened, the world fading into the music. His hand slid a little higher on her back, his touch light but deliberate. Her breath caught, and the space between them dissolved completely. Malik, she whispered, unsure of what she was asking for. He leaned in, his mouth close enough that she could feel the heat of his breath against her skin. You have no idea what you do to me, her voice trembled. I'm not doing anything. That's the problem, he said quietly. You don't have to. And in that moment, surrounded by people, music, and noise, it felt like they were alone. Two souls circling the edge of something neither dared to name. When the song ended, Malik didn't release her right away. He kept her there for a few seconds longer, memorizing the way she felt against him, the way her heartbeat matched his own. By the time they returned to their table, something irreversible had happened. It wasn't just attraction. It wasn't curiosity. It was the beginning of something dangerous and alive. For the first time since their marriage, they weren't strangers bound by circumstance. They were fire and gravity drawn together, unable to pull away. The night after the gala lingered like a dream neither of them wanted to end. Amara lay awake long after she returned to her room, replaying the dance again and again, the way Malik's hand had rested at her back, how his voice had dropped when he'd whispered against her skin, the way he'd looked at her when the world fell away. He had defended her in front of everyone, not as a man saving his reputation, but as someone protecting what mattered to him. And though she told herself not to believe it, a part of her did. Malik didn't sleep either. He poured himself a drink, but the whiskey burned in a way that had nothing to do with alcohol. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. The way she'd trembled in his arms, the way her breath had hitched when he'd leaned close. The trust that flickered there even after everything he'd done. It made no sense. He'd spent his life mastering detachment, and now one look from her was enough to shatter it. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the estate, soft and golden. The air smelled of wet grass from last night's storm. Malik found Amara in the garden, sitting near the old fountain surrounded by white tulips. She looked peaceful, her fingers trailing through the water, her hair loose and glinting under the sun. For a moment he just watched her from the doorway, something warm and unrecognizable tightening in his chest. He cleared his throat softly. "You like the garden?" Amara turned, startled, then nodded. "It's beautiful, peaceful." "My mother planted those tulips," he said, stepping closer. "She used to say they were stubborn flowers. They bloom even when everything around them dies." Amara smiled faintly. "Then I guess they're survivors." He nodded, his eyes never leaving her. "Like you," the compliment hung in the air. Her smile faded slightly, her heart skipping. She looked down at the water again, trying to hide the warmth rising in her chest. "I don't feel like one most days." "You should," he said quietly. "You've endured more than most people could." She looked up at him then, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, neither spoke. The world around them seemed to fall away. The whisper of the wind, the distant call of birds, the trickle of the fountain fading into stillness. Malik felt the words form in his throat before he could stop them. "About that night," he began. "I haven't stopped thinking about it. About what I almost became." Amara shook her head gently. "You stopped yourself. That's what matters," he exhaled, looking away for a moment. "No, what matters is that I made you afraid. I'll spend as long as it takes to make you forget that fear." Something in his voice made her chest tighten. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that the man standing before her now, the one speaking softly, carefully, was the real Malik Carter, not the one she met on that first night. "Maybe I already have," she said softly. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and when she saw the way his expression changed, shock, followed by something dangerously close to hope, her breath caught. Malik took a slow step closer. "You shouldn't say things like that," he said quietly. "Why not?" "Because I might believe you." They were close now, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating off his body. The air between them felt charged, heavy with something unspoken. Amara's heart raced. Malik reached out slowly, giving her every chance to move away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch was light, almost reverent, but it sent shivers down her spine. "Amara," he said, her name low and careful on his tongue. "You don't know what you do to me." Her pulse stuttered. "Then tell me." His thumb traced the curve of her jaw. "You make me want to be someone I'm not sure I know how to be." Before she could respond, Miss Rosa's voice echoed faintly from the terrace. "Lunch is ready, Mr. Carter." Malik stepped back, the moment breaking like a spell. "We should go," he said, though his voice was still rough. Amara nodded, her breath still uneven. "Right." They walked back to the house together in silence, neither daring to look at the other. But that night, as Malik passed her door, something caught his eye. The door that had always been closed, once locked, then left slightly open, was now wide enough for the hallway light to spill through. He stopped, his pulse quickening. For a moment he thought about walking in. He thought about the way she'd looked at him in the garden, the softness in her voice when she said she no longer feared him. But instead, he simply rested his hand against the doorframe and whispered under his breath, "Not yet." Then he turned away and walked down the hall, leaving the door open behind him. Inside, Amara sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the same open doorway, her heart racing with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not confusion, but anticipation. And for the first time, the distance between them wasn't made of walls. It was made of want. The fragile peace between Malik and Amara lasted only a few days before the past came knocking in the form of Evelyn Carter, Malik's mother. Her arrival was never announced. She didn't need to announce herself. The rumble of her black car pulling into the driveway was enough to send the staff scattering. Even the house seemed to stiffen as if bracing for impact. Amara was in the hallway when she first saw her, tall, graceful, and terrifyingly elegant in a tailored charcoal dress, diamonds at her throat and sharpness in her eyes. Evelyn carried the kind of presence that silenced rooms. One glance from her could reduce anyone to silence. When her gaze fell on Amara, it wasn't a greeting. It was an assessment. "So you're the girl," Evelyn said flatly, her tone cool as winter. "The one my son decided to marry?" Amara swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." Evelyn's lips curved into a faint, cold smile. "I expected someone different." Her eyes traveled down Amara's simple dress before meeting her gaze again. "Your father must be proud. His daughter, Mrs. Carter. Quite an upgrade." The words sliced deep, but Amara didn't react. She'd learned to stand quietly through cruelty long before she met Malik. "It's an honor to meet you," she said softly, forcing composure. Evelyn turned away. "We'll see if it stays that way." When Malik appeared, his expression darkened immediately. "Mother," he said tightly. "You weren't expected." "I don't need an invitation to visit my own home," she replied. "Especially when it's been turned into a charity project." "Enough," he said sharply. But Evelyn only raised an eyebrow. "You can lecture me later, Malik. For now, I'd like some tea. And perhaps your wife can join us if she's not too overwhelmed by her surroundings." Amara wanted to refuse to vanish, but Malik's eyes met hers, silently asking her to stay strong. She nodded faintly and followed Evelyn into the sitting room. The conversation that followed was polite on the surface but cruel underneath. Every sentence Evelyn spoke was dipped in poison. She questioned Amara's background, her education, her intentions. Each inquiry framed like concern, each word calculated to wound. Amara answered quietly, never defensive, never disrespectful. But Malik's patience wore thin with every passing minute. When Evelyn finally said, "I just hope this arrangement doesn't ruin the Carter name," Malik stood. "This conversation is over," he said coldly. "You've insulted my wife enough." Evelyn's eyes widened slightly at the word wife. "Malik, don't make the mistake of confusing defiance for strength. I raised you to be better than this." He didn't look back. "You raised me to be heartless. Maybe that's the problem." He reached for Amara's hand and led her out of the room, leaving his mother staring after them, stunned. That evening, the estate was quiet again, but the air was heavy. Malik hadn't spoken much since the confrontation. He spent the evening walking the gardens alone, his thoughts tangled and raw. When he finally stopped by the fountain, the moonlight shimmered across the water like liquid silver. He didn't hear Amara approach, only felt her presence when she stopped beside him. "You shouldn't have fought with her," she said softly. "She's your mother." Malik's jaw tightened. "She had no right to speak to you that way." "She's protecting you," Amara said. "At least in her own way." He turned to her then, his expression unreadable. "You think what she said was protection?" "I think she's scared," Amara replied. "Scared of losing control. Scared that you might choose someone, real, over power and status." He stared at her for a long moment, the moonlight catching in his eyes. "And what if she's right? What if I am losing control?" Amara hesitated. "Then maybe it's about time." Malik took a slow breath, his gaze drifting over her face. "You don't understand what you're doing to me, Amara. I spent years believing feelings were weakness, that love was a distraction. But now," he stepped closer, his voice lowering, "every time I see you, I feel like I'm coming undone." She stood still, her heartbeat quickening. "Malik," he reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek, his touch gentle but desperate. "You've changed everything, and I don't know how to stop it." Amara looked up at him, her breath catching as his hand moved to the back of her neck. Their faces were inches apart now, the air between them electric. "Then don't," she whispered. And for the first time, he didn't fight it. He bent down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, his lips met hers. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, almost hesitant, as if he was afraid she might vanish if he pressed too hard. But when she sighed against his mouth, something broke loose inside him. His hand slid into her hair, her arms moved to his chest, and the world fell away. There was no past, no pain, no deals, just the two of them under the moonlight, finally surrendering to what had been burning between them all along. When they finally pulled apart, Amara rested her forehead against his chest. "I don't know what happens next," she whispered. Malik's hand rested gently at her waist. "Neither do I," he said. "But whatever it is, I'm not letting anyone take it from us." Above them, the moon hung full and bright, casting silver light over the garden. It was quiet again, but no longer empty. For the first time in years, Malik Carter felt alive, and for the first time in her life, Amara Johnson felt seen. The night hung heavy with quiet heat. The air inside the Carter estate was still, perfumed faintly with jasmine from the open garden windows. Moonlight draped itself across the marble floors, softening the sharpness of the place that had never felt like home. But tonight everything was different. The house that once echoed with silence now pulsed with something alive, something waiting. Malik stood at his bedroom window, staring out at the night sky. His reflection looked back at him, familiar yet changed. He'd spent years mastering every part of himself, sealing away every weakness, but now all of that discipline felt useless. The armor he'd worn his whole life had cracked, and through it, Amara had quietly walked in without permission or apology. He didn't know how to stop wanting her. He didn't even want to. A soft knock sounded on the door. He didn't move right away. He just stood there, heart pounding, knowing exactly who it was. When he finally turned and opened the door, Amara stood there barefoot, wearing a pale silk robe that caught the light like water. Her hair framed her face, and her eyes, dark, uncertain, beautiful, met his. "I couldn't sleep," she said quietly. His throat went dry. "You shouldn't be here." "Maybe not," she whispered, stepping inside, "but I am." He closed the door behind her slowly. The air between them was thick with everything unsaid. The long nights, the almost touches, the glances that burned longer than they should. Amara took a step closer, her voice trembling. "You said you wanted to make me forget that fear." "I did." "Then show me," she said. Not with words, with truth. For a heartbeat, he didn't breathe. He searched her face, half afraid of what he might find there. Pity, confusion, hesitation, but there was none. Only quiet strength, the same strength that had drawn him in from the beginning. He reached out, his hand brushing against her jaw, fingers trailing down to her throat, tracing the flutter of her pulse. "Amara," he whispered, almost pleading. "Tell me to stop." She shook her head, eyes never leaving his. "Don't stop," that was all it took. The dam inside him broke. Malik's mouth found hers, slow at first, exploring, tasting, memorizing. She rose onto her toes, hands sliding up his chest, clutching the fabric of his shirt as if to steady herself against the intensity of it. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. The kiss deepened, fire meeting water, hunger meeting surrender. He lifted her easily, her robe whispering against his skin as he carried her to the bed. She trembled, not with fear, but anticipation. When he laid her down, his eyes searched hers once more, silently asking if she was sure. She nodded, and that was all the permission he needed. The world outside faded. No thunder, no whispers, no past. Only breath and touch and heartbeat. His hands were careful, reverent, tracing every inch of her as though trying to learn a language he had forgotten. She met him with a softness that disarmed him completely. For the first time in his life, Malik Carter didn't take, he gave. Their movements were slow, unhurried, like a story unfolding in the dark. The room filled with the quiet rhythm of two souls finding something they didn't believe existed anymore. When it was over, they lay tangled together, skin warm, breaths mingling in the hush that followed. Amara rested her head on his chest, her fingers drawing idle shapes against his skin. "You're shaking," she murmured. Malik smiled faintly, his voice rough. "I think it's the first time I've ever been afraid for the right reasons." She looked up at him. "What do you mean?" He turned slightly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Because now I finally have something to lose." Her eyes softened. "You won't lose me," she said quietly. "Not if you keep being this version of you." He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Then I'll never be anyone else again." For a long time, neither spoke. The moonlight drifted across their bodies, silver and still. Malik's fingers traced the line of her shoulder as he whispered, "I've spent my whole life chasing things that never mattered. But this is real." Amara smiled faintly, her eyes half closed. "Then promise me something."
I had no choice.
"Anything."
You have to believe.
"When the world tries to take it away," she said softly, "promise you'll fight for it."
Right now.
He looked at her for a long moment, his voice barely above a breath.
Please,
"I swear it."
do this.
Outside, the first hint of dawn began to touch the horizon, faint and gold. The storm of their past had quieted, leaving only the peace of two hearts finally finding home in each other. And for once, the Carter estate didn't feel like a mansion of marble and ghosts. It felt alive, with warmth, with hope, with love that neither of them had expected but both had needed. That night didn't just change what they were, it redefined who they were. The morning arrived slow and golden, sunlight spilling across silk sheets and quiet promises. For the first time since their wedding, the Carter estate felt alive, not with noise or movement, but with something far more fragile and rare. Peace. Malik woke first. He lay still for a moment, watching Amara sleep, her face softened by the morning light. Her breathing was steady, her lips parted slightly, one hand resting near his chest as if she belonged there. He traced her fingers gently, marveling at how small they looked against his. The thought came unbidden. He didn't deserve this. He had spent years breaking things that tried to love him, building walls high enough to keep the world out. And yet here she was, his wife, the woman he had once hurt, sleeping in his arms as though he'd never given her a reason not to. When Amara stirred, her eyes blinked open, still hazy with sleep. "You're staring," she murmured, her voice soft, a smile tugging at her lips. "I'm memorizing," he said simply. Her cheeks warmed. "That sounds like something you'll deny later." "Not this time." He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, his thumb lingering there. "Last night wasn't a mistake, Amara." "I know," she whispered. They stayed that way for a while, the world outside forgotten. But soon the day began to intrude. Faint sounds from the staff downstairs, a car engine starting in the distance, the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. Real life was waiting, and neither of them was ready to let it in. By the time they finally rose, the warmth between them had turned into quiet companionship. Malik helped her fasten the clasp of her necklace, his fingers lingering just a little longer than necessary. "You look beautiful," he said. Amara smiled softly. "You've said that before, and I'll keep saying it until you believe it." They went downstairs together, and for the first time they shared breakfast side by side. Rosa entered the room, surprised to find them both there, relaxed, smiling. Her eyes softened in quiet approval, though she said nothing. When she left, Amara turned to Malik, lowering her voice. "Your mother, will she come back?" Malik's jaw tightened slightly. "She will. Evelyn Carter doesn't let go easily. She thinks love makes men weak." Amara's expression gentled. "Then she's never been loved, right?" He looked at her, something shifting in his eyes. "Maybe neither had I." The rest of the day passed quietly. Malik buried himself in work for a few hours, but the house no longer felt the same. Every hallway seemed brighter, every room softer. When he walked through the garden that evening, he saw the tulips Amara had admired glowing in the sunset. For once, he didn't see obligation or burden. He saw purpose, but peace. Malik had learned, never lasted long in the Carter world. It started with a phone call just after dinner, a number he didn't recognize, a voice he hadn't heard in years. "Mr. Carter," the man said smoothly, "this is about the Johnson account." Malik froze. "What about it?" "You might want to check the transfers again," the voice replied. "Seems like someone's been moving money through shell contracts, your new wife's father to be exact." Malik's grip on the phone tightened. "That's impossible." "Is it?" the man said lightly. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like she sold you out." The line went dead. Malik stood there for a long moment, the words echoing in his head. He didn't want to believe it, didn't want to even entertain the thought, but the instincts that had built his empire whispered doubt. The very instincts Amara's love had quieted began to wake again. When Amara entered the room a few minutes later, smiling softly, she stopped short at the sight of him, rigid, silent, eyes dark. "Malik," he turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "Did your father contact you recently?" She blinked. "No, why?" "Because I just received a call claiming he's been moving money under the Carter name." His tone was cold again, careful, controlled. "Using the same access I gave him after the merger." Her face paled. "That's not true." "I want to believe that," Malik said quietly. "But you understand why I need to know for sure." Tears pricked her eyes. "You think I'd lie to you? After everything?" He didn't answer. The silence between them stretched tight and thin. The same man who had defended her before the world now stood before her with suspicion in his eyes. Amara took a trembling breath. "If you still think I'm something you bought, then maybe nothing's changed after all." She turned and walked toward the stairs, her voice breaking as she said, "I thought you saw me." "I thought you finally did." Malik didn't move. He wanted to go after her, to tell her he didn't mean it. But pride, the last remnant of the man he used to be, held him back. Later that night, he stood alone on the balcony, the wind cold against his face, his chest hollow. Below him, the garden glowed faintly under the moonlight, the tulips trembling in the wind. Behind him, the house felt too quiet again. He closed his eyes. hearing her voice in his memory. When the world tries to take it away, promise you'll fight for it. And he realized with a sharp ache in his chest this was the moment she meant. He turned back toward the door, ready to find her, to fix what pride had broken. But when he reached her room, the door was closed once more, the same door that had once been locked in fear, then left open in trust. Now it stood shut, silent. Malik rested his hand against the wood, his voice low. Amara, I'll fight for it. For you. Even if you don't believe me right now. Inside, Amara sat on the edge of the bed, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She didn't know if she believed him. She only knew that for the first time since she'd met him, love hurt more than fear ever did. Outside, thunder rumbled again in the distance, faint but growing. The storm wasn't gone. It was coming back, different this time, and unavoidable.
Sometimes I wake up and
And
feel
as the
like
first drops of rain began to fall, Malik Carter whispered into the dark, I won't lose you. The wind carried his words through the hall, past the sleeping house into the night that waited for both of them, uncertain,
do that.
dangerous and alive.